Hello, dear friends. Today I'm going to continue with a topic that I have previously discussed about cleansing and detoxification, specifically the controversy that exists among health professionals. Now, if you remember, I talked about the debate on whether to use strategies to mitigate the risks from excessive chemicals that are so ubiquitous in our environment and in all the products that we use and in the air that we breathe, the water we drink. We just can't get away from them. And for this reason, I do feel that it is best to try to help people aid their bodies' natural processes to eliminate these toxins, because a lot of them have been associated with harm. And some studies actually show the removal of them actually improves health. Now, with all that being said, there are some caveats to consider that many in the integrative health space who are actually advocating for these cleanses and detox are not often considering. And it isn't so much the approach that we're using, but how we approach what we're doing and the wording and the phrasing that is being inundated by certain diet culture messages. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But just to review, the three things that we want to consider when we are approaching any protocol that has to do with purifying the body or trying to improve health is the first thing, which is economic strains. So, expensive cleansing or any type of protocol for health are not always easily available or accessible to people that are more economically disadvantaged. We also have to consider the economic cost on the manufacturers, because this can actually drive products at higher prices for the consumers. And we see that, right, with quality vetted supplements that cost a little bit more versus the ones that you might get over the counter where quality is not guaranteed. The second thing we need to consider is food morality, where we deem foods good or bad based on if they're going to, quote, be pure or not pure, or clean or not clean for the body, or cause some other unwanted impact. Now, what happens is this places moral judgment on our diets and on our health behaviors. And for people who can't subscribe or afford these remedies, what can happen is there can be a deterioration in mental health. There can become an obsession with food, a rise in healthism, which is again equating people's self-worth based on their health behaviors. And it can lead to disordered eating patterns. Which brings us to the third point with expensive protocols for health. It can fuel eating disorders. Categorizing food as unclean or unpure can actually lead to the food morality we talked to and ignite full-blown eating disorders. Now, one of the most common eating disorders with this type of behavior is called orthorexia, where there's an obsession with only eating perfectly clean, pure, organic foods. So what I want to do is I want to dive into a little bit deeper into these pitfalls, and I'm going to, in this video, dive specifically into discuss how linking diet culture messages to purifying our bodies can lead to this fatal consequence, which is actually eating disorders. And then in an upcoming video blog, what I want to do is talk about how it can also lead to suboptimal healthcare for larger bodies, which is another very concerning ramification. Now, as always, all the resources and all of the references, as well as the studies I discuss, will be linked in the video description, in the resource section, as well as within the accompanying article. Okay, so the first thing to consider is we need to talk about diet culture and how that's inundating healthcare with detoxing and cleansing and just in general. So medical news today defines diet culture as a set of myths and expectations around food and weight, which typically equate thinness to health and categorize foods into good or bad types. Diet culture creates a moral hierarchy of body sizes and shapes, which typically idolizes thinness and creates fear and negativity about fat. Social media, consumer products, and health fads can all contribute to diet culture. Now, in a previous article of the National Federation of Professional Trainers, which actually interestingly has since been removed, it was stating that eating disordered registered dietitians and professionals defines diet culture as a belief system that focuses on and values weight, shape, and size over well-being. Through focusing on weight, shape, and size, it's not innately wrong, but valuing them over total physical, mental, social, spiritual, emotional, intellectual, or financial wellness is. And the consequences of valuing any single area of wellness over all other areas is that we get thrown out of balance and it doesn't create true long lasting health. Now, an article from Johns Hopkins University recently caught my attention on just how pervasive diet culture has become in our world, because it stated since the beginning of the pandemic that many members of the mental health community have been very concerned about the dramatic rise in eating disorders. And this has been reported globally, not just in the United States. And it includes people that have excessive and dangerous compensatory behaviors to prevent weight gain, disturbances in the way in which folks are experiencing their body weight and shape, intense fears of gaining weight, and restrictive eating. So, what do these diet culture messages have to do with cleansing and purifying, detoxifying? Well, many of these programs promise a better body type can be attained through this cleansing process, whether it's healthier, whether it's weight loss. And this innately implies that our bodies aren't enough as they are and that we're unclean and toxic. And it consists of a type of moralization of food that we discussed as good and clean or toxic and bad. This can lead followers to, again, become excessively preoccupied with clean eating and be fearful of certain foods, eventually leading to orthorexia or other eating disordered patterns. And again, it's going to deteriorate at mental health in general because people are focusing so much on their food, they're not living their life and they're stressed about it. So, does this mean that we shouldn't cleanse our body's natural processes? So does this mean that we shouldn't cleanse and aid our body's natural elimination processes? I don't think so, because I do still think it's important to support our bodies for ridding these detrimental chemicals because there's so much studies that show links between them and health harms. But I am concerned about our approach and how we're wording things because we're bringing in diet culture into cleansing and detoxifying. And it could be exchanging one health concern for an even more fatal one, because we know that eating disorders are the most fatal mental health disorder in the world. So I know that many people, including practitioners in the holistic and integrative community, know that our body and brains need enough food to optimize their function. In our attempts to shield the body from these stressors, though, we could be harming our mind and biology because we're getting suboptimal intake and poor nutrition, cutting out certain foods, and maybe the diet isn't as broad as it could be to get all the nutrients it needs to optimally function in the brain. And again, this form of dietary restriction can lead to nutrient depletion and food obsession. So if we're advocating for diet culture messages or food morality and body size status, we are a contributor to fueling the mental health crisis. So I want people to take that in, whether you're a practitioner or someone that is following this, because this can either intentionally or unintentionally fuel eating disordered behaviors. And why is this intentional for some people? Because some forms of healthy behavior are actually not healthy when we look at it from a mental health perspective. In fact, a lot of the fitness influencers and some of these extreme diets, what they're advocating for would be classified as eating disordered behavior. So all that being said, some of you might be thinking, but what about food addiction, right? We know that processed foods could be addictive. So prioritizing clean foods is actually something necessary. We're saving people from an actual other mental health problem and addiction. But this is a nuanced conversation. I did a whole series on it. And basically, the compounds in some of these foods may not be best for our health. We know that. I do advocate for organic when possible, but again, there's the economic strains. And it can't be the sole cause of eating disordered behavior because they're complex, just as any chronic disease. It isn't just about the food or what the substance is. It's like saying that alcohol is addictive, which it can be, but not everyone turns out to be someone with a substance use disorder with alcohol. right? There's all these different things that fuel someone becoming a quote alcoholic. The drinking alone isn't the cause of the quote alcoholism, now known as an alcohol use disorder. So eating is even more complex. So if we look at studies that show a dieter's brain, a dieters are people that restrict food and they moralize food as good or bad depending on what's on their diet. When they're given the food that they're restricting, if they compare that to someone who doesn't restrict, their brain patterns for dopamine and neurotransmitters light up. Like they have this intense response that a person that doesn't restrict doesn't have. So, is it the food itself or how we're approaching it as something kind of the forbidden fruit that's causing more of this dopamine and this biochemical response that makes us crave more? So, we need to consider this quote unquote lurking variable. All right. So, how can we stay healthy in a toxic world, given that we are in diet culture and given that we are exposed to these chemicals, and given that maybe eating some foods that don't have as many chemicals in us are actually better for us? So, I think we have to keep in mind this balance of do we want to fuel this healthism or do we want to fuel actually helping people stay healthy in a balanced, holistic way and not contribute to the mental health crisis. Because diet culture messages on food morality and clean eating and worshiping the thin ideal are fueling them, regardless of how that's being done, even with the best of intention. I do think that we can focus on how to be healthy in the true sense of the world with this balance of well-being for the body, mind, spirit, soul, and how to function at our best, regardless of body size. We can help people with certain loving and nurturing behaviors with their body, what feeds their soul, what's good movement for them, where are their social connections, what foods make them feel good and also nourish their body, and how can we take this with supporting their biology, their psychology, their soul, their ethnic practice, and their pleasure without moralizing it. And I think that will allow more space for people to feel comfortable in their bodies, to be healthy and strong, be able to introduce some of these concepts of helping our body eliminate some of these toxins without having the determinant of our morality be the purity of our diet or how our health behaviors are. Okay, and just as a gentle reminder, in the last video, I talked about the joyful oil blend, which is really great for increasing self-confidence and self-esteem, because when you're up against diet culture messages, we need all the support we can get to calm our bodies and brains down from that stress of trying to live up to impossible standards, to just focus inward again and be nurturing and loving and caring to ourselves. And we know essential oils can help us do that. All right, I would love to hear what you think. I know this is a controversial topic, and I would love for you to share your thoughts. And I want to send you many blessings